Events are much more complicated than normal Zoom.
Welcome everybody today to our event on reconciliation 30 years after the breakup of Yugoslavia, which will deal especially with the young generation and how the shapes and also the ghosts of the past shape the future in the region. When we were discussing about how to tackle the issue about the breakup of Yugoslavia, we came up with the topic on reconciliation because we think it's something from the past which is important for the present and also for the future. My name is STEFANI FENKART and I'm director of the International Institute for Peace, but I would of course also like to thank VEDRAN, who is going to moderate, and from the Austrian Institute of International Affairs, and GERHARD MARCHL, who will also say some words right after me from Renner-Institut. Together in 2018, we already, the three of us, we initiated this group, Young Generation for the New Western Balkans. It's now already more than 3 years old, and we really try to tackle different perspectives on the region, to give fresh ideas, to shape the future from a different point of view. I look forward to a very interesting discussion. We have 3 excellent speakers here on spot and 2 excellent speakers who are via Zoom with us, and VEDRAN will moderate, and you will also present them very shortly, I guess. So this is it already for me. If you have questions, you can of course then also ask them. We're also live streaming. You can do it also via Zoom. And I'm passing now on to GERHARD MARCHL from the Renner-Institut, who will also give his welcoming remarks. Thank you very much for the cooperation, and thanks for you that you came, even though it's 35 degrees today. It's hot. Austria plays soccer. We know it's not the perfect date for us, but we will see. I think this is even more important than the football game. But I mean, that's of course my opinion. Gerhard, there you go.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. My name is Gerhard Marchl. I'm responsible for European affairs at the Karl-Renner-Institut, and also a warm welcome from my side to those who follow us on Zoom, Facebook, and those who are here in the premises of the International Institute for Peace, and of course also to the speakers here live in person or via Zoom. We transmit this broadcast, this event also on Zoom and Facebook, and there you also have the possibility to ask questions. We will try to pass them on to the moderator of the discussion, VEDRAN DZIHIC, and he will try to bring them, your questions, into the discussion. We are discussing, as Stephanie already told you, an important issue today, reconciliation. We all know the reactions to the life sentence of Ratko Mladic a few days ago, about 2 weeks ago. These reactions to this life sentence in The Hague were characterized by aggression and nationalism, revisionism, and unfortunately this is only an example. We all know that reconciliation hasn't made enough progress yet in the Western Balkans. Of course, there's the time frame 30 years ago. There was the breakup of Yugoslavia, and we all know from other examples that reconciliation takes time. Let me also stress that there are some positive results already, that there are quite many projects, many initiatives in order to promote reconciliation in the region, but as we all know, there's not enough progress made yet. In order to discuss this quite hot topic on this hot day, we invited representatives, activists, experts from the young generations in the Western Balkans. And as Stephanie already told you, they are part of an important initiative born here in Vienna about 3 years ago and promoted by the International Institute for Peace, the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, and the Karl-Renner-Institut. And before handing over to VEDRAN, I'd like to thank the other 2 institutions for the fruitful cooperation, and again for this initiative, for this event today. And now, VEDRAN, the floor is yours. VEDRAN DZIHIC is senior researcher at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs and lecturer at the University of Vienna. I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much, Gerhard. Thank you, Stefanie. Thank you, Hannes. Thank you all joining us from Vienna, Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Brussels, Berlin. So we are having a very interesting setup, and now that Corona numbers are going down, we go back to opening up and discussing certain issues that are important and that have not disappeared in the meantime from the agenda. And the issue of democratization has not disappeared, the issue of reconciliation has not disappeared, the issue of socioeconomic opportunities, inequalities, etc., they have not evaporated, even though we have a very, very hot day today, they have not evaporated from the agenda of the Western Balkans. So we are slowly moving back, and we have invited a group of young people from the region. They have joined us in Vienna for the first time. We have two of our colleagues joining us per Zoom. We had a very interesting workshop today, and we want to inform you, the audience, on what we discussed, what's the state of reconciliation today in the Western Balkans, how can we move beyond reconciliation, and what does reconciliation encompasses in a kind of a broader sense. We have a setup of three wonderful colleagues on the table, and we have, as I said, two colleagues joining us per Zoom. And the major starting point is we do believe that there is a need to talk about reconciliation, and that it is important who talks how about reconciliation. We do believe that young people have to have larger stake in public debates on the international level, and that the voice, I mean, this is sometimes a phrase, the voice of young people is important, but in this particular situation, in this particular context of reconciliation, we do really believe that we need different voices 30 years after the breakup of former Yugoslavia. So, who are the wonderful young people that are joining me and joining us per Zoom and here on panel? On my left side, I have STEFANI SPIROVSKA joining us from North Macedonia. I usually say Macedonia, but then I have to correct myself, which is functioning quite good right now, even though I still tend to say Macedonia. Stefanie comes from North Macedonia. She is working for the Youth Educational Forum, dedicating to engaging young population in discussions, in deliberations, in organizing, setting up projects. And she will definitely bring in her experiences from her work into the panel. Then on my right side, she's always on the left side of the history, but this time she's on the right side. That's DONIKA EMINI, joining us from Kosovo. And as you can imagine, and as you know, it's not easy to travel from Kosovo to the rest of the European Union due to the very complicated issue with visa. Unfortunately, one of our colleagues was not able to join us, even though we put our best efforts, and I do think that both the Austrian authorities and the EU authorities do need to know, and that we need to put this on the agenda over and over again, that Kosovo's young population, Kosovo, deserves to get it as soon as possible. This is one of the biggest injustices that we have experienced in the last decade in the former Yugoslavia or in the Western Balkans. But DONIKA can tell us a lot about visa liberalization, but we will focus on reconciliation. She is executive director of the CiviKos platform from Kosovo. Then we have MAJA BJELOS from Belgrade Center for Security Studies. You probably follow Belgrade Center for Security Studies. They produce all the time wonderful analysis, research engaged very much on not only in Serbia, but also on the regional level. So MAJA, it's great to have you. And here we fly over Zoom to SAMIR BEHARIC. SAMIR, where are you sitting right now? In Jajce?
Yes, in my Jajce residence.
Yeah, Jajce, Samir has a precious residence, and the group is going to visit him in October. Samir Beharic is youth activist, member of the Western Balkans Alumni Association, but I think at the same time Samir is a lot more, so engaged in many initiatives and has many stories to share, so we are very much looking forward to Jajce input today on the panel. And last but not least, Mario Mazic joining us from Croatia, huh?
Tirana currently.
Okay, good to have you. Mario is, has been engaged in several efforts and initiatives in the last few years on youth, on reconciliation, etc., etc. But right now, he is probably investing majority of his time into the new organization called Europe&Southeast consultancy agency. And he is founding partner of that organization. So this is the panel, and we just jump in medias res with my first question. I mean, when we discuss reconciliation, Gerhard already mentioned basically the story that the glass is half full. I mean, we have this question, whether is the glass half full or half empty. When we look back at the recent debates around Mladic and discussions between Montenegro and Serbia right now, we need to say that the glass is half empty, pretty much emptied, but there are still also like positive examples. We want to just explore the situation right now from different perspectives in the first round. So to see how is it from the position and perspective of young people in Kosovo, how is it in the perspective from the young people in North Macedonia, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, the overall region, and then basically try to put these nuts together to get a kind of an overall picture. And what we also want to explore today is basically the ways how to move forward, because I do think that the young generation has a lot to say about this one. So without further ado, I hand over partly Zoom, partly real mics that we have on the table to DONIKA. DONIKA, from Kosovo's perspective, so what will you say? What's the status quo? How empty is the glass, and how quickly we need to fill it up with water and with some nice positive juice to have a progress?
Thanks a lot, Vedran. Thanks for having me. It's really good to actually talk to real people and not to myself, you know, in front of the computer. It's also too hot, but also too comfortable to wear pants in the panel discussion. It has been almost 2 years that we are comfortable at home and traveling around the world through Zoom. So yeah, I mean, I wish I was this optimistic about the reconciliation process in Kosovo, but unfortunately, it's not just something that happened during the COVID-19 pandemic in which we kind of lost connection, but even before that, in Kosovo there was a major turning point, which I would say the Alba Forum, when we opened the debate of potential border changes as a quick fixer of all problems that we have between Kosovo and Serbia. That was the turning point when we stopped talking about the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia from a Brussels point of view, in which you have agreements and you actually work together towards normalization. Reconciliation also part of it because it contributed to people communication. But then we stopped actually even talking about dealing with the past because we opened a new window which shouldn't supposed to be open. So not just that, but also the fact that reconciliation has for a long time been politicized by the political elites in both countries, used it for nationalist rhetoric, use it for election, daily consumptions of politics. In a way, it made reconciliation look different in the eyes of the citizens. Reconciliation is something that is empty, that is never going to work, because, I mean, we invested 20 years and nothing has been done. And this is because of, you know, it being politicized. And the other element is the special court, which in a way, after ICTY and all the courts that we have seen, we kind of believe that it's tribunals, courts, and something like this that has to push us, and politics that has to push us towards reconciliation, and not a multi-frontal approach and work with citizens directly to address all the concerns and deal with the past. So having these elements, the glass is almost empty. And I'm really hoping that the change in Kosovo, the change in the government and having, an entirely new political elite that has not been part of KLA because, now we're having a forward-looking reformist leaders leading the country. I'm hoping that now this reset button will be found somewhere and we'll start talking about reconciliation beyond the special court and beyond the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. I think at this point it is crucial that we invest, us all together, join forces, and really help the region to actually open a new blank and a better page. Not similar to this that has been happening in the past 20 years. Of course, there are a lot of success stories, and many of those we discussed today. And it's amazing to see that against all odds, citizens made it. They have built initiatives that actually help people get together. There are stories of success. I see that in Kosovo as well. I see many initiatives in which Serbs from Kosovo and Albanians from Kosovo join together and talk about the missing people, which is super sensitive. And until today, we only talked about missing people from the Albanian part. But now we are jointly talking about both. So against all odds, there are successes in which we should nurture, we should help, and we should definitely work proactively with to turn the page.
Great. I will. Each time, as when you present the first inputs, I'll just have a kind of one tough question to all of you. So the first one is, DONIKA, do you really see the dialogue and this kind of quite often quoted, basically, historical agreement between Kosovo and Serbia as the major precondition for any type of reconciliation, or does it matter at all? Does it matter at all right now in 2021?
It shouldn't. It shouldn't. Dialogue with Serbia is something that it's a starting point in a way. It's a starting point because, we published a paper on German and Polish reconciliation, and you have to recognize the borders and then start talking about issues that are of major importance. It shouldn't be, because reconciliation is a long-lasting process. It requires a lot of stamina, requires a lot of work. If you look at the German-Polish model, even after 70 plus years, there are still a lot of disagreements. There are still a lot of on-hold issues that bother both sides. But, in general, they moved forward. And in this case, I strongly believe that, we want to think that it should be an internally driven process. This is our, basically what we constantly say. But it should be also a combination of something coming from the outside, which is the EU and NATO, which was the case with the Germany and Poland. And in this regard, I want to mention enlargement as a very important event in this regard. I do believe that dialogue is something else in which we sort of find out what's the modality and how do we coexist around each other with Serbia, and then bilaterally work actively on dealing with the past and the missing people, which is very important, because some in Pristina said this as a precondition for the dialogue, but there are a lot of missing people from the Korean War, and that might take literally forever. So we really have to work actively, but after we close the dialogue, so we don't link processes that shouldn't be linked.
Yeah. Great, thanks a lot. There is an issue that we might want to pick up when SAMIR comes into the play later on, because SAMIR has worked in Jajce to deconstruct this kind of ethnicized or ethnopolitical kind of a separation between students in a school. And as we do know, there is in Kosovo also this huge inter-ethnic distance between Serbs and Kosovo Albanians, which is one of the issues for the future. Anyway, thanks a lot, DONIKA. Let's go to STEFANI, North Macedonia, bordering Kosovo, the country that we, the last few years, put so many hopes into. That was the first country in the region that managed to get rid of an authoritarian regime of Gruevski, who is now sitting safely in Budapest and has joined his brother in arms, Orban. And Macedonia probably was the most dynamic society in the last 3 years. I mean, changing Prespa agreement, changing the name, pushing towards, hoping for opening of the negotiations with the European Union, which is still stalled and blocked. So, Stephanie, when you look today, I mean, there is the issue of reconciliation. I mean, there is also this issue in a kind of a broader historical context, because Bulgaria right now is putting a huge pressure on North Macedonia precisely because of the history, not of the history of the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, but because of the history of way back of centuries. So what's the constellation in North Macedonia right now, and what do you see as biggest and major problems and dilemmas for North Macedonia today?
Yeah. When it comes to my remarks, I would like to reflect a little bit more on young people and what they need and where they stand and what are the processes that are sort of paving their way to their future. And there was something very interesting that DONIKA mentioned about the reconciliation being a process or maybe a cycle. And I think that we also mentioned that this morning that instead of cycles of reconciliation, we need a constant process that is going to, continue, and it's going to be adapted to the current situation and the current state in which we are. And I would start with that, because young people need reconciliation processes, not in order to solve a particular problem they have, but in order to get rid of a burden left from the older generations. And I see that on two levels. One is the integration within the country, because we also, regardless of the things that are happening outside of the borders, we have still some progress to be made when it comes to the relations between Macedonians, Albanians, and the other ethnicities that live within our country. So we need to work on that integration more strongly. And when it comes to the international reconciliation, then I think that there are even more questions that are being opened now, especially now with the Bulgarian case and the process that needs to be solved there. And that is just the beginning of the process. And I think that we as a civil society sector, but also the international community and the donor society, need to try to mitigate the consequences that are going to follow. Because unfortunately, our educational system is not designed well enough in order to mitigate all of these occurrences. And we have young people and young generations that are super fragile when it comes to nationalistic questions, and that are still lacking capacities of critical thinking and analyzing, especially these types of situations, and when it comes to international politics and more complex processes. And there are two things that I see as urgent now that need to take place. One is that we need to empower young people, but empowering them through knowledge, through skills, through teaching them how to critically think and how to be aware on what is happening within the country and on international level, and that could be done through the educational system. And when we're talking about the educational system, I think that's the only system through which all of the young people go. So that's why I think that's one of the key stakeholders when it comes to reconciliation, especially in the process and of building a coherent region and a country that is going to be, well settled and well connected and has good relationships with the neighboring countries. And the last thing maybe is that we need to listen to the young people more, to put them, first of all, to educate them well, but then to listen to them when they have ideas, when they have initiatives, when they want to make a particular change. There was a research that unfortunately the social capital that young people have in North Macedonia hasn't changed in the last 10 years. And that's a lot of wasted potential and a lot of wasted chances that we as a society missed. It's probably because we've been bothering with bigger things as the regime, as the democratic statues, as everything that we had at the same time happening. But then again, we have young people who vote, and I think that Agim was mentioning that this morning, who vote, but unfortunately they're not following the current happenings. They don't get informed as much as they need to. So these are sort of the main points that I wanted to highlight maybe, and then open again later.
Definitely, one question. So Macedonia did introduce all these reforms, change the name. pushed for the NATO membership, expected so much from the European Union, and we know that the young population, they need a vision. They want to join the European Union. Now we see a rise of Euroscepticism to a certain degree. We see basically also this vision shaken through the events coming directly from the EU. I mean, the fact that Bulgaria is blocking still and that the EU is not able to bring back Bulgaria on the negotiating table. How is this impacting the perspective of the young people on the European Union and on their future? Because they very much connect their future with the European Union.
Well, if we see the timeline, before we signed the agreement with Greece, there was the agreement of friendship with Bulgaria, and no one expected this thing to happen now, to backlash, yes. And I would like to refer to the Euroscepticism, the expectations of young people in these two processes. So when the country changed its name, I would say that it was with something above 40% support from the citizens, which means that in the best case they were 50-50 who support and who do not support the change of the name. But for those who supported the change of the name, it wasn't that we didn't, I mean, that we, aspired for the new name as much as we thought that maybe that's the path we need to go through in order to reach to our European future. Because if we take a look a little bit back, my generation and people who are now 30, 35, those young generations have been promised the European future ever since they were born, and they were waiting for the country to become independent, to become then more, more stable, then to become part of the European Union. Then the integration process has somehow started, and we're constantly waiting, and generations before us are waiting, and that's the main burden I think that these generations have. Before the agreement with Greece, I think that, of course, young people were seeing European Union as the only alternative or the only way, the only future we would like to have. And the percentage of young people who expect our entrance in the European Union has slightly decreased since the process with Bulgaria has started. I mean, since this new conflict has raised. So for now, I cannot really constant some Euroscepticism, but that the young people are being slightly disappointed by the European Union and by the process, and that they are sort of discouraged and disappointed. I can say that is happening, and I can see that both through research and through the young people.
Message to Brussels and to European capitals: get your act together in terms of North Macedonia and Albania. Thanks, Stefani, a lot. Let's jump a bit to Bosnia, to Samir. Samir, you are now sitting in Jajce, and we usually, I'm also from Bosnia, and we usually, the Bosnians, we tend to say that this is the most complicated country that you can imagine worldwide, so with different layers of government and whatever you take, and this ethno-nationalism. And yet, it's precisely in Bosnia that we recently got the new mayor of Sarajevo, and she's a young lady, outspoken, acting against old nationalist narratives, trying to reach out to the people. And there have been so many examples of young people stepping up, taking initiatives, also in your country, and also in terms of reconciliation, also just in terms of breaching the boundaries that are set up by political narratives and ethno-nationalist narratives. Samir, from your point of view, and I know that you are energetic as we can imagine, and that you are full of enthusiasm. How do you see this kind of reconciliation and the whole story? How is change possible through the eyes of your colleagues, youngsters, people in Jajce, in other cities of Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Thank you very much, Vedran. Thank you very much for all three organizers of this event for first of all organizing the event and inviting me to speak at this distinguished panel. I don't want to be party breaker, Vedran, but as you rightly pointed out, Sarajevo has a new mayor who has been elected indirectly, and also Banja Luka has a new mayor. The mayor in Banja Luka was elected by the votes of the people. He's also young. He's in his 20s. He's a genocide denier. He's a fascist, and he's someone who will not lead the country towards the reconciliation process, So I personally don't think, and I don't buy this, what usually, older people generally in Bosnia, but also internationals especially, want to push this narrative about young people will take us out of the mud. I really don't think that, because young people in Bosnia, just as their parents and as older generations, are also nationalistic, are also corrupt, are also fascist, And as we have seen, the only breakthrough in the Banja Luka local elections was that SNSD has lost, and there is another party candidate that has won the elections. I would say a new mayor of Banja Luka is even worse than his predecessor when it comes to glorifying Chetnik movement, denying all the genocides from the Second World War, from the past war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and therefore what I wish to see in Bosnia and Herzegovina is not necessarily young people, on power. It's progressive, young or old. I don't care, but progressive people who are capable to think, with a bit broader vision, with the vision that encompasses, a wider margins of society, including a lot of those young people and also not so young people in Bosnia and Herzegovina who are leaving the country. A lot of them are leaving the country also because they do not see their future in the country, not because they don't have good jobs, but also because they do not see their future for themselves and for their children in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One of my good friends 2 years ago, he left the country because he said both of him and his wife had good, nice jobs for Bosnian standards. And he literally said, I'm leaving the country because I'm leaving Jajce, the city of Jajce, because my son is about to attend 2 schools under one roof. And I do not want him to attend such schools because this is not something I would like my child, to go into through that kind of brainwashing system of education. And I'm a strong believer of bottom-up approach, of having the reconciliation going from bottom up. What do I mean by this? I mean by this that in order to achieve reconciliation, we really do need to have the institutions, educational institutions in the country that teach young people reconciliation, that bring young people together. I don't think there is any court in the world, including the ICTY or the residual mechanism, that will make anyone reconcile. In case if we have, in segregated schools in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where young people are taught different historical narratives. If in Republika Srpska, convicted war criminals are hailed as national heroes, this is not going to work long-term in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't want to paint the whole picture black, of course. There are also very positive examples, such as this group of students in Jajce who fought against segregation, and who prevented politicians to segregate their own school, However, I have to say that's pretty marginal group when it comes to broader Bosnian society. When it comes to the Mladic verdict, as I said, in Republika Srpska, you see, graffiti, you see graffiti hailing him. He has been sentenced. The verdict is there, but his poisonous heritage is blooming. And that's the sad and disappointing and very, very dangerous truth. Last weekend, not this one, but the weekend before, I traveled to get my vaccine, actually in Priboj, in Serbia, which I'm very grateful for the taxpayers of Serbia for inviting us to get the vaccine there. On my way there from Sarajevo, I had to go through several cities in Republika Srpska, Gacko, Višegrad, Rudo, and you can see a lot of still of these, monuments glorifying genocide, glorifying war criminals. And I think these deep-rooted, quote-unquote, values are going to stay there beyond the verdict, beyond of some of these institutions, and unless we really overhaul and we really change from the ground up the educational system, the way how we teach children, I don't think we can hope a lot. And I can say this in this here group, which I usually don't say that much out in public. Because currently in Bosnia and Herzegovina, every second, according to PISA study, every second 15-year-old is functionally illiterate. What does that mean? That these young people cannot, critically decipher what it's written in their textbooks. And their textbooks are teaching hate in a lot of examples. Without critical thinking, these young people are going nowhere else but they are going through a training ground for future nationalistic voters. And in that sense, I see new progressive young people as hope, not just any young people in the political scene. And in that sense, I would really commend also your work, the work of all the three organizations who have organized this event in bringing together young progressives from the region and progressives in general. Because without united young people in the Western Balkans, there is also no united Western Balkans.
Thank you, Samir, a lot. But one quick follow-up question. I mean, this is what we all emphasize. We need more investments into education. We need more time. We need critical thinking. We need, we'll need a lot. We need to exchange people, etc., etc. But looking into the Bosnian constellation, do you think that we can create infrastructure for critical thinking without changing the Dayton Peace Agreement and the Dayton Constitution?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I sincerely think that Dayton Peace Agreement is obstacle for some things, but not for all. Even without Dayton Peace Agreement, without cantons, without Republika Srpska, without federation, without Brčko district, we would still have people who hail, people war criminals. So I don't think it's we can blame it to a certain extent, but I also don't want to fall into a trap, of some certain Bosnian nationalists on all three sides who say, Bosnia is non-functional state. And we cannot move forward because of Dayton. Dayton is not, to blame for corruption. Dayton is not to blame for nepotism. Dayton is not to blame, for hailing genocide and war criminals. So I say, to a certain extent, yes, we need, and I'm up for changing the Bosnian constitution, the Dayton constitution. But however, we also need to look in a mirror and also say and conclude that for many of these aspects and many of these problems, it is us that should be blamed, beyond Dayton Constitution itself.
Thanks a lot, Samir. Now we move to Mario, you are from Croatia. You know a lot what's going on in Croatia, but you have been following the regional processes for quite a long time. You have been engaged in different initiatives for reconciliation. And my question will be, sometimes we have an impression that in the region we have this kind of a competition of different concepts of revisionism. We have seen an increase in revisionist discourses in Croatia, followed by a similar one in Serbia. So they are like corresponding vessels, like communicating vessels. And Croatia is in the European Union. Croatia has went through many changes, etc., etc. And Croatian young population has the opportunity to travel, is traveling, is leaving the country. Some parts of Croatia have been emptied of young people, as you probably know the best. So looking from Croatian perspective, which is ahead of the rest of the Western Balkans in terms of EU integration, how is the situation today? Does the formal EU integration creates a better precondition for reconciliation? And what do we need to do about revisionism from Croatian perspective? A lot of questions, but try, youngsters and this kind of a nexus of different questions. Mario.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Vedran. I'll start basically by just sharing my view on the reconciliation as a notion. And I think reconciliation never stops. If it stops, if we're no longer engaged in reconciliation, then we're also no longer reconciled. And I see the reason for that as simple, and that is that the damage done is irreparable. We can never bring back the people who were killed. We can never give the generation of my parents their youth back. The damage is irreparable. And when you look at it on an individual level, imagine a person who has committed a terrible act of violence, who has killed someone. If they go on for the rest of their lives, remembering that and remembering it as a terrible mistake, they are going to have a potential to rehabilitate and behave differently. If they forget, then the potential of committing such an act again is there. I think the same goes for societies, and the same goes for nations. And I think the fact of these damages being irreparable is a prime example of why illegitimate violence is basically such a deeply anti-patriotic act. I don't think that anybody hated the idea of Croatia more than Pavelić when he instituted the fascist system. I don't think anybody hated Croatia more than Tudjman when he attacked Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example. This is something that for the rest of time, our society and our country is going to have to live with, remember, teach young generations about, to make sure that we act in a way that is founded on the understanding of the terrible mistakes that were made by our political predecessors in that sense. So my view on the reconciliation is that it's an ongoing process of a healthy society, that a healthy society first needs to recognize something as a mistake and then engage in the process of reconciliation for as long as it exists. I think what happened in Croatia, and I think your question is sort of going in the very key topic in that sense, is that Croatia was let to join the EU at a moment when there was no recognition of the aggression against Bosnia. There was no recognition of systemic crimes committed in Croatia during World War II, and there was a systemic approach to ethnic crimes. And I think the EU accession in that sense served a purpose of legitimizing Croatian nationalism instead of contributing to its delegitimization. And we see today Croatia is emboldened by that. You just saw it recently at a NATO summit when a supposedly left president again waged a war that continues against Bosnia, but now it's no longer a physical conflict with Bosnia, but it is a sort of a symbolic war against the idea of a Bosnian citizen. We have an issue with mentioning that Bosnia has citizens. That's unacceptable to Croatia in a sense. And I think it's also why Croatia cannot be a stronger partner to Kosovo in the European Union, which it would like to be symbolically, but it cannot advocate for a civic approach in Kosovo and advocate for an ethnic approach in Bosnia, which it does. And I think there's basically a consensus in Croatian politics around dealing with the past, around the issues of reconciliation. We have this very simplistic story of we were attacked, we defended ourselves, all the crimes that we committed were the crimes we committed in defense without actually wanting to do that. We can pay respect to those victims, but that's basically it. We do see some moments of symbolic sort of progress, like we saw last year during the commemoration of the Operation Storm, where the Prime Minister actually held finally a relatively mature speech, but then the President came in and gave a terrible speech to counter that in a way. So we do see these moments of symbolic process, but that's progress, but that's where it stays. And EU pressure is in that sense gone. I personally, as a Croatian citizen, do not understand the difference between the EU and EPP. Those two abbreviations are the same thing from my perspective. I don't see that there are, European institutions standing up for the values that we supposedly had to meet in order to become members of the club. I don't think that the more constructive approach from Croatia is coming, because it's not incentivized by the political parties, are not incentivized to go for policies. EU does not have any form of pressure that we're staying in Europe perspective of and I'm very afraid what approach we're going to negotiate with Bosnia as an EU.
We are losing you. Your connection is pretty bad. Can you switch the camera so that we can hear like the last few sentences? Because so can you just repeat the last two? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm afraid to see how Croatia is going to continue behaving while Serbia and Bosnia and other countries approach the EU. Because I'm a member of a club that you want to join, and I have some bilateral business with you. So it gives Croatia a strong position to basically blur the lines between what's EU negotiations and what's me strong-handing you around my interests.
Thanks a lot, Mario. Just a very quick follow-up question. We all saw the victory of MAJA, of this new bottom-up movement in Zagreb. So there is a new political force on the Croatian national level and in the city of Zagreb. Is this a promise, a positive outlook for the future in terms of reconciliation, possible inputs coming from MAJA?
Well, it's too early to tell. I mean, the people there are people who are progressive also when it comes to topics of regional reconciliation and so on. But it was local elections, and the platform was not strong in these sorts of terms, just because the local elections are not very conducive to that. But I think there is a lot of people who have stopped identifying sort of with Milanovic's nationalist policies masquerading as some sort of a left, so that they are looking for a more kind of genuine alternative. And I do think MAJA is a more genuine alternative in that regard.
Thanks a lot, Mario. So let's, I wanted also to ask you about who is going to be the Croatian leader that is going to reach hands to Serbia, and who is going to be the Serbian leader on the other hand side. I do know that Milanovic and Vučić are not going to shake hands that way. So that leads me to Maja and to the biggest country in the region, which is Serbia. Has the biggest responsibility probably, is probably causing the biggest problems because it is simply big. No, but I'm kidding a bit. But Serbia is quite often as a hotspot when we look into this kind of dealing with the past, what is not happening, revisionism, etc., etc. Usually people from Bosnia, Croatia, Albania, Kosovo, we all tend to blame Serbia for everything that's bad. But let's have a kind of a view from Serbia from the perspective of the young generation, because I think the picture is, as always, like much more complicated than it is. It's not just a blame game. It's a lot going on in Serbia. So can you tell us a few insights from the young generation perspectives in Serbia?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, Serbia is perceived as the biggest troublemaker, but Serbia likes to be perceived as the biggest victim. As Mario said and mentioned for the Croatia, it's same in Serbia, like that political elites established very simplistic story about past, where the Serbians are one of the biggest victims, and where everyone else, including the court, that actually managed to pass the verdict against Mladic is called anti-Serbian, not really acknowledging what really happened. When SAMIR said, we need more progressive people, word progressive got a whole new meaning in Serbia due to Serbian Progressive Party. And well, the situation in Serbia is bright if you decided to believe the government and the words of Serbian president, or if you watch TV Pink and Happy TV or other program media. So when we are trying to discuss reconciliation, what is really striking at the moment in Serbia is that space for discussion about what happened in the past, or any kind of discussion is missing, or it's really much shrunk recently. And the void is filled by dominant prevailing nationalistic rhetoric that is very much present in the mainstream media. And maybe to the older generations, the current situation in Serbia resembles on very much 90s, because the same political elite from the 90s and politicians are still in power, and the nationalistic and war rhetoric is still dominant and prevailing. When it comes to the facts, there are facts, and there are a lot of evidence documented mainly by the civil society, which is still dominant force that challenges the current narrative and seeking for the truth and trying to push reconciliation on the political agenda. Although I must say that reconciliation is not a priority for the Serbian government at the moment. Although there are facts about what happened in the past, they are very much twisted or neglected, denied or not accepted. When it comes to the COVID and this context, really taught us that we have problems with establishing facts. We cannot agree on how many people died from the COVID in Serbia. That is maybe less sensitive political topic than what happened during the wars. So we have really much problem with establishing facts and communicating that facts. But the past is quite present in the public discourse because it's very much used to divert public attention from the state capture, from the problems such as corruption, from any infrastructural problems, from organized crime, from environmental problems, and so on. So it's a very good tool for politicians to bring it in the public sphere when they want to make the smoke screen and cover what are one of the ongoing problems in Serbia today. And when we talk about the political context, it has been also slightly changed, and we discussed it before. It's now we are discussing reconciliation in more right-wing contexts, and geopolitics are even complicating more internal dynamics and discussion about past. It often reinforces ethnic identities and religious identities and not helping the processes to move forward. Also, I believe the SAMIR emphasized, and the same thing is happening to Serbia when we discuss young generation. Many young generation, but also workers are leaving Serbia, and that becomes like demographics are becoming a huge problem from Serbia, and it becomes a thing with whom we will discuss in future and how we will create, what are the forces that we want to actually create different society that we are living today. And politicians like to discuss about investments nowadays. They don't like to discuss about reconciliation. They want to invest in roads, in buildings, infrastructural projects, and I believe that we need to invest in a new generation of people that will really carry on this process in a future. Because I know that a lot of activists, especially women, they're active and present in this area, are lacking support, and I believe not many will jump in their shoes to carry and push for reconciliation in the future. So we need to think about
recording stopped.
new generation of those people who will carry on the process. Maybe I will stop here.
Maja, a follow-up question. So, what is the alternative for a young person in Serbia that doesn't want to join the progressive party that is not progressive? So, I mean, you have one alternative is to join SNS, the Serbian Progressive Party, which, by the way, is one of the biggest political parties measured upon the size of the population. So, that's one alternative. The second one is to leave the country. Is there a third alternative for a young person today in Serbia, and what is this one?
Yeah. Now we are seeing that many grassroots organizations are blooming in Serbia, and new movements that are challenging traditional parties, because young generation do not trust traditional political parties. There is a low trust in public institutions, and they are trying to I don't know, form or make new space for them to express what is their problems and problems in their communities. So these grassroots are numerous. The thing is, they're not trying to connect themselves because they're spread around, and that makes them a bit weaker, but still they're they're very much diverse, and they're coping with different kind of problems. Now or they are struggling on many fronts with the government, from the women's issue, from environmental issue, economic, healthcare, energy, or all sorts of. So they're trying to build the force around these cross-cutting issues and create alternative to the dominant political elite and to dominant narrative about this.
It's good to hear that there are alternatives. There is a third way. We didn't get so many questions so far from the audience on Zoom, but there are few people sitting live, real people sitting in the room. I mean, you are all real, obviously, but some people are more real than other people. I'm joking, but if there are questions in the room, there is one remark that I got through the digital channel on North Macedonia and the EU, which is quite obvious. I mean, someone is making a point that basically as long as the EU is not able to solve internal dilemmas, which is referring to the situation with Bulgaria right now, there will be basically no support for any kind of reconciliation that's going to backlash. That's one point Stefani can pick up on that one, but that's quite obvious that the EU has to deliver here. Are there any other questions in the room so that we can collect one or two questions? It can be also remarks.
Vedran, there is also a question in the Zoom chat.
Great. That's...
I'm not sure if you can see
How
it.
can external players... Oh yeah, I got it. How can external players, donors contribute to support locally led peace building and reconciliation? So what worked and what didn't in the past years? This is coming from CiviKos, who happened to be a former student of mine. That's always good, from Robert Bosch Foundation. They are setting up a large locally led peace building project, and I think this is an important issue because there was in the 90s, in 2000s, a lot of efforts on the peace building and peace reconciliation. A lot has been forgotten in the meantime, but I think this is also an important one. So we have this one on locally led peace building and reconciliation. We have North Macedonia. Agim is also joining us from North Macedonia. Can you hand the mic over to... No, but we collect and we take it to the panel. Yes, we want to see. So if you go here.
That way is the camera. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. It's okay? Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. We've had very nice and fruitful discussions today in the morning and at noon. And I agree with most of the remarks that were presented by Stefani, whose organization I know for a long time, and we've been working together. an aspect that I would like to mention and to bring to the attention is how much do third countries, third parties within the Western Balkans contribute in a positive or negative sense when it comes to the reconciliation process. I know that in North Macedonia there are actively working countries in this regard, some for the benefit of the country, some for the for making things worse. But how do you actually assess their role? And do you think that we can, as civil society, act in a more concerted voice to stop this propaganda? Because we know that EU integration is the only alternative right now for our respective countries, and even the latest poll from the ERI, International Republican Institute, it also portrayed once again that despite the fact that EU is not delivering, the support for EU integration is still high, among the highest since the independence. Thank you very much. Everyone, because it's Balkan-wide.
So, anyone else? Yeah. Yes. Please.
Sorry. Sure. Sure, don't worry. Hello to everyone. Sorry for being late. I was running from the other meeting. I am a permanent representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina to international organizations here in Vienna, but speaking today in my personal capacity as I don't have a power to speak on behalf of the country. Very interesting panel, at least this part that I've been able to follow. Very interesting discussion, and I would just like to raise two issues to our speakers today. For example, for Mr. BEHARIC, who is coming from JAICE, and mentioning two schools under one roof phenomena, which we also speak a lot within the OICE. How he sees the solution of this issue, which would be acceptable for all. Whether the, for example, Irish model would work for our case in context of both integrated schools and schools that works with separate curricula by will and free will and free choice of parents and children. And the other question on reconciliation for anybody who can reply. How do you assess in long-term context the lack of true reconciliation after the conflict, after the Second World War in our region, how it influenced the lack of true reconciliation today? Is this too connected by any means? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yes, Mr. Ambassador. Yes, of course. We want to give you the mic, and we want to see you here so that the audience can also see you.
Why not? It's more a clarification rather than a question. It was very interesting, if I got it correctly from Mr. MAZIC from Croatia. Somewhere he said that they don't see a difference between EU and EPP, and EPP stands for European Popular Parties. That's. I'd like to be yes. A little certain about what I heard.
Yes, you are, and Mario is going to repeat it. So, okay, let's, Silvia.
Short question, Silvia Nadjivan is my name, and the discussions, VEDRAN, we know them more than 20 years. What can civil society do with regards to reconciliation? And we have, in a way, as problematic situation, we have the same problems, sometimes the same players, and sometimes regarding civil society, always new young generations who bring up the topic of reconciliation and the problem that we have a situation that doesn't change. So what is the possibility now, 20 years later, and after 2000 and after this window of opportunity of EU integration, and now we are still standing on the same point, and in fact we have the situation that money constructs political and social reality, and what are the possibilities. You, VEDRAN, you have at your institute a Jean Monnet project and Jean Monnet network, and this is one possibility to foster such activities, and where are other possibilities also with regards to awareness raising? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and there is a question in the meantime. I mean, obviously Russia has to pop up at a certain moment in any debate. The question is, how does and will Serbia balance between EU integration and stronger relations with Russia, probably also with China? But I mean, there are a lot of questions, and the questions are here I mean, we cannot answer them all, that's for sure. But luckily, few of you are here, so we can continue after the panel discussion. I would like to invite my panelists just one by one to pick up one or two aspects, not to be too long as usually. I mean, the time is quicker than we are, and is passing by. In reverse order, so Maja, I would like to invite you first to pick up one or two aspects of many of the questions that were posed.
Yeah, I wrote it down, so I'll try to quickly address a few. No, not all of them, yeah. Maybe when it comes to like ongoing discussion today is like World War II in Serbia, and who are the good guys and bad guys. So we managed to go back further in their history and again to restore this kind of discussions and to change the narratives who are bad guys and try to eliminate a long anti-fascist heritage of Yugoslavia, especially during the World Wars. So it's very much present and live, and it's a challenge how to actually establish again what happened in the World War II, not only in the 90s. So that's the quite dominant discussion. When it comes to the civil society, what can civil society do? Civil society in Serbian post-Yugoslav space done a lot. They collected evidence what the government didn't do. So the government our government had to do a lot more than civil society already done. When it comes to the EU, a challenge within the process of EU integration is that EU funds goes heavily to the governments. And there are a few drops that civil society in our countries are receiving. So that's a challenge. And many civil society organizations are facing they need the core funds to actually to function and to exist. And newly established grassroots organizations, they are seeking change in so many fields, do not have funds they operate. So when you think about how donors can support reconciliation, they need to think from the perspective of local communities or local NGOs. And current funding is really not helping to the civil society in Serbia, but I believe in other countries as well. When it comes to the role of third countries, it's very controversial what is the third country, because Hungary has now bigger role in Serbia than it has before, but Orban and Vučić can work very smoothly in revising the history. So that's also the challenge. Not third countries, sometimes referred non-EU countries, but also when it comes to the Turkey, it's also questionable because it's EU candidate country. So it's quite controversial about this, but sometimes they are influencing internal dynamic and even fueling more nationalism than it was before. So there are some positive sides, but there are also negative sides. And also I mentioned before Currently, Serbia is facing many economic problems, and the development model that is offered, especially in terms of increased China role in the region, is not connected to good governance principle, is not connected with transparency, democracy, human rights, not even inclusive, creating inclusive institution, society, and so on. So that's also, if we want to talk about influence of third countries, that could also affect the reconciliation process as well.
Thanks a lot, Mario. So there was this question on the European People's Party that you can easily answer, and then if you want to pick up on some other issues.
Sure, I'll be quick also because of the connection issue. I just wanted to respond to that quickly. So before the last elections in Croatia, the European Commission president literally stole the resources of the European Commission to support HDZ in elections as a president of the European Commission. HDZ, a nationalist party that prevents any civic progress in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Merkel and the EPP are a united front supporting HDZ on one side, SNS on the other side, and ESDA internally in Bosnia in that sense. Those are the political problems that need to be solved, not partners that are going to help us solve those problems. So yes, I see no difference in terms of values between the EU and the EPP when I see the constant and consistent promotion of ethnic nationalism by the key political leaders in the European Union in the Balkans. And to quickly respond to the question of the colleague from the Bosch Foundation, I think they have been doing wonderful work thus far. I think they should support the bottom-up approach to reconciliation, as SAMIR spoke as well. But I think there's also a case to be made that they could invest in informing the citizens of Germany that their chancellor keeps supporting ethnic nationalism in the Balkans, and that we would that it would be beneficial if that stopped.
Thanks a lot, Mario. But there is a certain green wave. I mean, imagine Germany gets a new green chancellor, and then Možemo and the new green chancellor can join forces. I mean, there is plenty of opportunities to come up. So keep our fingers crossed. Thanks, Mario. Samir.
Yeah, thank you. Also, thank you for the question. If I recognize from his title and from his position, this was Ambassador Sinistra Benson who asked the question related to the two schools under one roof. And what do I see as a solution? The solution is to abolish them. And this is not me saying this, you know, this is the Constitutional Court of the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who back in 2014, you know, had this verdict that the two schools under one roof are unconstitutional because they represent a form of segregation and discrimination. Now, how to reconcile what students and their parents want to learn could be done through a model that already now exists, which is the so-called national group of subjects, where students could teach parallel, you know, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, you know, literature, history, even if you wish history, because currently you will not, I mean, believe it or not. So currently in EITE, if you're a primary school student, there is at least 5 national group subjects in integrated schools. So this is even in high school. So it's students who go together, attend classes. They go to separate classes for Bosnian and Croat language and literature, history. So there we have like a parallel history narratives, geography, music, and religion. So there are 5 subjects where students, you know, teach these 2 different narratives of these 5 subjects. So, however, in the primary school, the students are completely segregated, at least in EITE. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's in 56 such schools, according to the OECE reports from December 2018. So in 56 schools, students are attending different classes in different classrooms on chemistry, on mathematics, you know, on sports, which is nonsense. And the biggest obstacle, it's not, you know, it's not the walls in the classrooms. It's the walls that are being built in young people's heads. And those are the walls which are the hardest to crumble, because they keep standing and they keep standing for years and years, decades and decades, you know, even after these schools would integrate. And it's really, really funny, because it's usually politicians who during Yugoslav era attended the schools, the classes together. They are the ones segregating the children now. And even to make it even more, I will not say funny, that's in fact very sad. Currently now in Jajce, in one of the remote schools, in one of the village segregated schools, there were only two students who graduated from that school. So there were two schools under one roof, and one student finishing his final grade in that school, the other one finishing the final grade in that school. So if I can say, and if I may say, if we as the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina do not integrate those schools, the demographic decline will. Because there will be no incentive and no justification for these schools to operate. Because in order for a school to operate, there has to be a certain number of students that the ministry has to approve, and then it will go. Unless, if that's not the case, then these schools cannot function. I would just like to mention also something else. I'm not sure who asked the question related to students, you know, and to education. I think, and this is one of the recommendations we gave in the paper back in October that we presented to the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You know, one of the recommendations was to push for a intra-Western Balkans student exchange program. An exchange program for university students and also for high school students and primary school students. Because believe it or not, if you're a University of Sarajevo student, for example, it's easier for you to go for one semester exchange to the University of Beijing, to the University of, I don't know, Johannesburg, than to go to the University of Belgrade, University of Pristina, University of Skopje, University of Podgorica, etc. In case of University of Pristina and Kosovo, we cannot even travel. So abolishing the visa regime between Bosnia and Kosovo is one of the prerequisites for the regional cooperation, for, you know, intra-Western Balkans brain circulation, and also, of course, for boosting reconciliation as such. And also then looking beyond, you know, abolishing the visa regime between EU and Kosovo is another huge obstacle. And just to share this with you, just last week I attended Globsec forum in Bratislava, and one of the speakers on the forum was Miroslav Lajčák, and I asked him a question. I said, I asked him, he was speaking, you know, how EU delivers, etc., 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 and I asked him, Ambassador Lajčák, if the EU has not delivered in case of North Macedonia, in case of Kosovo, when it comes to visa liberalization, why should any of the Western Balkan government leaders trust the EU when it comes to, you know, when they say, if you deliver, we deliver, the EU? And he said something that's not just undiplomatic, something that's not just, it's not just, you know, it's really abhorrent, it's really like demotivating. He said, and I quote, if you don't trust the EU, then go somewhere else. The EU will not beg anyone to join. End of quote. Which, you know, it left in the hall, it left hanging in the air as something that's, you know, that's unbelievable, that someone who is EU appointed person who should bring together the stances of the Western Balkans, of Pristina, Belgrade, and the EU could say something like that. And that, I would say, music to the ears of politicians in the Western Balkans who just appear to want to, you know, join the EU, but they actually do not want to, because in their case, it's the status quo that's the winning card for them.
Okay, thanks a lot, Samir. I mean, Lajčák can probably safe in assuming that we are not going to anywhere else. So, you know, we are now in Vienna, and that's the European Union, and so we're gonna continue going towards, I mean, EU, but values of the European Union and values that we all adhere to. Stefani, your turn. What do you want to pick up from the wide range of questions.
Okay, I'll be very, very short on this one. So about the role of all of the actors, I think that Maya already mentioned something, and when it comes to the civil society, I think that we should also strive to establish a continuous process of reconciliation that is needed. So maybe to push a bit more in that part. And that there was one interesting question about the not opening reconciliation about one particular process and how does that affect the others. I'm not sure about the direct link between those two processes, but for sure it is living an example that things could be put under the carpet and then not open them and then not resolve them. And I would comment it only in that regard, because we need to start setting good examples of how processes will be fully closed, or at least to see them clearly that they're being solved. And about the role of the EU in relation to Bulgaria and Macedonian conflict or issue now, I think that the EU should be the one who is going to push most about resolving it, because now we don't clearly see where do they stand or what does the EU particularly do. And for a short time from now, there will be much assistance needed, especially from the EU, in order to mitigate all of the processes that are going to follow, especially in raising the nationalistic narratives and so on and so forth. So I think that EU should be watching this closely and deliver, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Last but not least, DONIKA. You have not
first of all, yeah. No, I don't. But I want to say something to Samir, who was very vocal, and he was like literally talking on behalf of a colleague who couldn't get the visa to go to Globsec, and I'm talking on behalf of a colleague who couldn't come to Vienna because of the visa, it was very disappointing to see that Miroslav Lajčák did not really appreciate the fact that a Bosnian young activist is really talking about a Kosovo citizen who couldn't travel to Globsec and was advocating as a Bosnian for Kosovo in the EU in such a very high level platform. But instead, he answered, well, you can go somewhere else. Well, guess what? We cannot go physically. I mean, you cannot get rid of the Balkans physically. It's impossible. So, well, instead of us going somewhere else, the others will come to us, which will bring me to the third actors, which in our case is Russia. I mean, you can never think of Russia interfering in Kosovo because, well, not recognizing, so, and China, but China is like a little bit more distant. But, you know, Russia has direct interference through not just reconciliation, but also the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia in the northern part of Kosovo. My colleagues from the NGO sector are being threatened by the Lista Srpska, which, by the way, was formed in Brussels. In a way, yeah, the basis was created there. And then who tipped the Serbian tabloids just because she attended an event in which we talked about missing people, both Serbs and Albanians. So you can see how the pressure works. And this is definitely through, you know, all the machinery that is out there from Russia and Serbia to actually put on hold the process. I mean, the Orthodox Church at which is situated at the National Library in Pristina, I mean, it was never opened. All of a sudden, it became an issue, and then, you know, they had like a mess there, which is okay, but it was done to trigger another conflict or I don't know, an ethnic backlash, so then it would prevent us from actually working on things that would move our countries forward. The other thing is that how do I assess? I mean, we never reconciled. We never even tried. I mean, never tried. The NGOs tried, not the political elites. I cannot find, like, even I consider Kurti a progressive political leader, but instead of talking about, you know, reconciliation or bottom-up approach, I see him talking about this treaty that in which we would basically guarantee that we will not attack each other. So it's like, oh, we are not killing each other, but that doesn't mean that we will move on into like other stages of that would bring us to normalization and genocide, you know, suing Serbia for genocide, which is again seeing reconciliation through the lens of tribunals, courts, you know, again, the same rhetorics that we have heard in the past 20 years, which we don't want to hear because it's empty. And the other one, that this brings me to the question about CSOs. In Kosovo, all the work that has been done so far is because of the CSOs. With limited capacities, with limited amount of funds, they have managed to do things. I mean, I know the first person who was raped during the war because of an NGO. She felt safer to go through an NGO than through the institutions which are existing in Kosovo. So this, you know, is sad because they don't have capacities. They were sporadic. They stopped when the grant, you know, basically was gone. And the country did not do anything. The institutions did not do anything in this regard. So, well, the EU should support, another third country party should support the NGOs in this regard. And the grassroots initiatives, they are amazing. They are very trendy according to the EU. But when it comes to funding, they don't fund them, because it's unsustainable, because they don't have the capacities. They always go for bigger NGOs, which are basically fancy and in the capitals. They don't go for those that are smaller because maybe they won't be able to report, and maybe then we'll have issues with our bureaucracy and receipts instead of looking at the actual impact. So this is the issue, and this is something that I've seen that the EU wants to change, but I don't know how fast it will change, knowing how the EU works.
Yeah, this is a big issue. Thanks, Donika. Before I give the mic to Hannes Svoboda for a few concluding remarks, just one sentence for all of you, but really one. You know, my girls, they are right now into magical sticks and, you know, changing the future, and everything goes. I mean, they just tip the father, and the father jumps and then wakes up and does everything. But sometimes we do need to have these bold wishes. Samir, if you will have the magical stick, just one move, one bold move that you would have, one sentence, but don't tell us that you are going to remove Miroslav Lajčák from his position, something different. One bold step with a magical stick in terms of reconciliation from the youth perspective.
Well, as I said, bottom-up approach for the segregated schools, at least, I mean, on a very critical, practical example for educational institutions to start working based on human rights principles in the region.
Okay, great. Bottom up, Maja.
Novi Sad, and political elites are trying to persuade us that people don't have a power and then citizens are not powerful. So this proved that people can restore the power and influence the change. So they entered. These are like baby steps, but if this could be spread like fire through the Serbia, we can see some light. So yeah.
The citizens' muscles.
No.
Stronger education, this is, yeah, that's quite important. Donika, last but not least.
Reconciliation should be about the people, not about elections and politicians. Yeah. And when we realize this, we will definitely look at it from a different approach.
Thanks a lot. I mean, this is, you know, this is a kind of a funny exercise, but I think, I mean, when you have to narrow it down to say, what is it? Bottom up, education, investing into citizens approach, etc., etc. This is really a big takeaway. So, Hannes, the floor is yours for concluding remarks.
Very few remarks. I have no magical stick either. 4 points. The first one, of course, the ongoing process. I think it's very important that we consist on that it is an ongoing process, a very difficult one with up and downs. If you look to Germany, and very often it was mentioned German-France, German-Polish reconciliation, Germany was totally defeated. It was on the ground. Everything was destroyed. It's not comparable to the situation in the Balkans, where even the losers were continuing to govern their country. So it is very difficult. And even in Germany nowadays, many decades after the Second World War and this horrible effect, They are Holocaust deniers. They are people from the AfD who say, why should we apologize? It's a small thing what happened during the Second World War. So we have to be prepared that this is an ongoing process, or as somebody said it in our interview, it's a way of life. We have to constitute very difficult, not only in the Balkans, because in all Europe still. Disappointment of the EU I can share. I think it is horrible what is broken, promise is broken, especially on the Kosovo issue on the visa. We'll come to that immediately, and of course also on North Macedonia and Albania concerning the negotiations. And if some people say, well, North Macedonia is a bilateral issue, it's not a bilateral issue, because what Bulgaria is doing is preventing the EU to follow its policy. So Bulgaria is attacking EU's policy, and that should be made very clear. Now on the issue of visa Kosovo, we have our problem because one of our colleagues couldn't come because of the terrible behavior at the embassy of the Austrian embassy by some local in Skopje. And I phoned with that lady, and it was horrible to how they treated me as somebody who did not want to have a visa, but I can imagine how she was treating the applicant from Kosovo. On the Lajčák issue, I was there. I think the answer of Lajčák was very unfortunate and without empathy. But what he meant is, don't go to the EU, go to the different countries, the member countries. That's what was he meant. And it could be misunderstood. But of course, if EU politicians very often are attacked for something the member countries don't do, because the visa liberalization is not something the Commission doesn't want to do, but the member countries block it, like also the membership. It was very unfortunate, the answer, but it showed the lack of empathy for the problems people have in the region. The third point, I think it is, and we discussed it also during today, it's very important to see not only EU against member countries, and this is Mario, I think, left, but it is concerning especially also Croatia. It is a fight we have in the EU between the civic approach and the ethnic approach, as I think Mario mentioned herself, or the revisionist approach against the progressive or reform-oriented approach. The fight is everywhere. What do we say about France, God forbid, or whoever, that Le Pen is winning the next presidential election? It's not an EU case, again, as such, but it is somebody where we have the fight in all our countries nowadays. In all our member countries, we have the fight between these different tendencies. In some countries, like in Poland or Hungary, and also, unfortunately, in the country who is presiding the European Union in the coming 6 months, in Slovenia, we have a strong dominance of this revisionist or ethnic-oriented or whatever, or nationalistic tendency. And I think it's especially our group is fighting against that. And the last point is immigration, because you mentioned we didn't discuss it so much. But I think it's a very important issue, a very difficult one. I'm preparing for an Africa discussion we have in this institute on Thursday, I think. And I read and an African expert said, the young people shouldn't leave Africa because we need them. They should not only come back to the funeral of their parents and grandparents, but we need them to be here. The same can be said, of course, about the Balkans, but the conditions are not that there's much incentive for the young people to stay. And therefore, I think it's very important that this migration issue, again, is something which the EU has to do together with the countries, or manage together with the countries, because it's, as such, it's not a solution neither for the countries nor for the EU if it is more or less an enforced emigration, if there is, because there is no alternative or a lack of alternatives. So I think the whole debate showed that it's not so much the separation here, the Balkan countries, here is the good EU, but it is a fight across the different national borders between different tendencies, different approaches we have, and unfortunately the right-wing, or let's say the nationalistic approach, the revisionist approach has been growing in the last years, and all we can do is to try to stop it or to fight it and to mobilize the other forces, because, and this is the last the right wing or these nationalistic forces are much better in mobilization because they have some negative attitude, and we all know, especially from the social media, that negative messages are much more easy to spread than the positive one. But nevertheless, I think the other side, the good side, of course, we are on the good side, has to be organized much better in order to counter and to tell another story and the counter story to the nationalistic approach. Again, thank you very much. Thank you, VEDRAN. Thank you all who participated. And of course, it is recorded. It will be presented in the social media from our institute and hopefully also from the others, so that it will be spread even on when we have the event on a day where Austria is playing soccer. I don't know. Anyway, it will be probably not so exciting as this debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an unusual sound, so that we clap the hands. Usually on Zoom we don't have it, so it's very nice. Enjoy your evening.